Imagine trying to keep a slab of meat fresh when the desert heat could cook an egg on stone. No fridge, no freezer, no stick it in the cooler and hope. Yet the Egyptians managed, and their hacks were ingenious. Now let's step back for a second. Picture ancient Egypt, not the Hollywood version with pyramids glowing under the sunset while a mysterious harp plays in the background, but the real day-to-day grind. People sweating in mud brick houses, kids chasing goats through alleys, bakers pounding dough, and somewhere in the middle of all that, someone just slaughtered a cow, or maybe a duck, or maybe a prized goat. Great, you've got meat. The problem? In this kind of heat, that beautiful meat turns into a buzzing, maggot-infested disaster faster than you can say pharaoh. And yet, the Egyptians ate meat. They didn't just eat it, they stored it, traded it, even tucked it into tombs to accompany the dead. That meant they had to figure out how to cheat nature, how to tell bacteria, flies, and rot. Not today. Let's start with the most obvious tool in their kit: salt. Salt was their refrigerator, their cling wrap, their best friend. They had it in abundance from the Nile Delta, evaporating in pans, clumping on riverbeds. To them, salt wasn't just seasoning, it was survival. They would rub it into fresh cuts, sometimes pack entire joints in layers of salt, waiting as the crystals pulled out water. And that water, that's basically life support for bacteria. Take away the water, and you stop decay in its tracks. But salt wasn't just practical, it added taste, changed texture, and gave meat a longer lease of life. Imagine chewing on salty dried beef while standing guard at a temple gate. It wasn't exactly five-star dining, but it kept your stomach full and your body alive. Now, Egyptians were clever enough not to stop there. Drying was another everyday trick. Strip the meat thin, hang it where the desert air could whip through, and let the sun bake it into a leathery chew. In that climate, nature gave them a free food dehydrator. The result? Something not too different from jerky, tough, salty, and portable. Soldiers marching long distances probably had some tucked into their belts. Peasants working in the fields likely gnawed on dried fish or goat meat. The beauty of it was simplicity. Nothing high-tech, just sun, wind, and patience. But drying alone had limits. Leave meat out in the open too long, and the flies swarm like it's a party you didn't invite. That's where fire came in. Smoking wasn't just about flavor, though that smoky tang was a welcome bonus on otherwise bland rations. It was a tool. Smoke dried the surface, laid down protective layers of compounds, and most importantly, drove insects away. Picture strips of fish or goat hanging from wooden poles, slowly turning golden brown as smoke curled around them. The scent would seep into the meat, giving it depth and character, while the haze acted like a natural shield. In a way, it was their version of both seasoning and pest control rolled into one. Walk into one of those kitchens, and the whole place must have smelled like a giant campfire, with racks of meat swaying gently as if caught between survival and delicacy. And while most people picture kings lounging lazily on thrones, surrounded by dancers and treasures, it's worth remembering that even kings wanted their food to last. Luxury or not, spoiled meat was still spoiled meat. In fact, tomb discoveries show us another layer of Egyptian genius: embalming food. Yes, you heard that right. Not just mummies in sarcophagi, but mummified dinners. Whole joints of beef, racks of ribs, ducks plucked and prepped, even geese preserved with the same care you'd expect for a body heading into eternity. These weren't tossed haphazardly into a tomb, they were coated with sticky resins, carefully wrapped in linen and sealed tight. It wasn't just ritualistic pomp, it was practical thinking for the afterlife. Think of it as turning dinner into an eternal snack pack. The idea was that the deceased would wake up hungry in the next world, and there had better be something waiting that hadn't rotted into sludge. Imagine opening your eternity picnic basket and finding ribs that were wrapped up 3,000 years ago, perfectly preserved, ready to serve at a cosmic banquet. That's not just preservation, that's commitment at a level only the Egyptians could pull off. Now here's where it gets interesting: fat. Fat was their airtight lid, their vacuum seal. The Egyptians sometimes cooked meat slowly in fat, essentially confit, then sealed it beneath a thick layer of grease in a jar. Without air touching the surface, spoilage slowed dramatically. The fat hardened like a lid, keeping bacteria locked out. And when you were hungry again, you just dug through the fat, reheated the meat, and carried on. It was a neat little trick that still exists in rural cooking traditions today. And let's not forget fish. If meat was tricky to preserve, fish was 10 times worse. Caught fresh from the Nile, fish spoiled in hours under the Egyptian sun. So salting, smoking, and drying fish became almost an art form. Some evidence even suggests Egyptians salted fish raw. Early caviar, anyone? Imagine a fisherman on the Nile cleaning his catch, rubbing salt into its belly, hanging it on racks while the desert breeze turned it into something edible days later. That wasn't luxury food, it was survival, and it fed villages. Now pause and think about the contrast. On one end, a peasant family drying strips of fish to last the week. On the other, priests embalmed slabs of beef with resins so the gods and the dead could eat forever. The same principle, keeping meat edible, but on vastly different scales, from the dusty courtyard to the golden tomb. Of course, none of this was foolproof. Salt was valuable, drying took time and the right weather, smoking needed fuel, wood, reeds, whatever you could burn. And if you messed up, spoiled meat could mean sickness, wasted labor, even death. Preserving food wasn't just about taste, it was about life and survival. But if there's one thing the Egyptians excelled at, it was taking what the land gave them and stretching it to the maximum. They had the Nile, they had the desert air, they had minerals, fats, resins, and they figured out how to bend those into tools for survival. Let's zoom in on daily kitchens. Imagine a mud brick room, a simple clay oven glowing red, jars lined up against the walls. In one jar, dried fish. In another, fat-sealed goose meat. On a rack near the doorway, strips of goat jerky hang like laundry. A family gathers, tearing off salty pieces, dipping them into bread, maybe chasing it down with beer brewed from barley. That was dinner. Not glamorous, not Instagram-ready, but it worked. Now zoom out to the temple granaries and palace storerooms. Rows of large jars sealed with clay stoppers. Inside, meat cooked in fat, fish salted and packed, offerings waiting for ceremonies. Workers labeling, carrying, stacking, an ancient logistics system ensuring the pharaoh's table was never empty. Preservation wasn't just a kitchen trick, it was tied to religion, politics, even military campaigns. Armies couldn't march without food that lasted. Priests couldn't offer spoiled sacrifices. Families couldn't survive famine without preserved stores. Meat preservation wasn't just cooking, it was strategy. And let's not forget festivals. Picture a religious feast in full swing. Oxen sacrificed with great ceremony, long tables groaning under roasted ducks, racks of mutton, baskets of bread, jugs of beer, and even the occasional wild antelope or gazelle. The smell of roasting fat drifted through the air while musicians played and priests chanted. But here's the thing, once the crowd ate their fill, not everything disappeared off those platters. Leftovers mattered. Egyptians weren't about to let a good haunch of beef rot in the desert heat. Families took what they could, salted it, dried it in the sun, or tucked it into jars under thick layers of fat. In a way, ancient Egypt invented the original meal prep. They just didn't have plastic containers, only clay pots and cleverness. There was also a bigger social side to this. Preserved food wasn't just survival, it was commerce. Salted fish, for example, became a market staple. Fishermen along the Nile didn't just feed their own village, they could salt their catch and send it upriver to towns that never saw fresh fish. Preserved meats filled out the rations given to workers building temples and pyramids. Imagine hauling blocks of limestone under the scorching sun. Fresh lamb every day, forget it. But dried or salted meat? That was realistic, practical, and it kept energy flowing. Preservation kept labor forces fed, which in turn kept monuments rising out of the desert. Food preservation wasn't just about staying alive. It was about keeping society's biggest projects moving forward. Now think about an army on the march. Chariots clattering over the sand, soldiers trudging with bows, shields, and spears, the heat pressing down like a second enemy. No way could they drag herds of fresh cattle into battle. Livestock slowed you down, needed water, and risked collapsing before the fight. Preserved food was the only answer, Strips of jerky-like beef tucked into packs, salted goat sealed tight, even jars of meat cooked in fat carried along caravans. Those soldiers fought on stomachs filled with food that had been cleverly prepared weeks before. In that sense, food preservation wasn't just survival, it was national power. Armies move on their stomachs, and Egypt's armies could move farther and longer because someone back home knew how to salt a fish or seal a goose in fat. You don't build empires on empty stomachs, you build them on preserved meat. And here's the fascinating part, so many of these tricks survive today. Salted meats, smoked fish, confit, we still use them. Not because we lack refrigerators, but because the flavors stuck. Bacon is basically salt and smoke doing their job. Jerky is sun-drying in a bag. Duck confit is Egyptian fat sealing with French branding. These ancient kitchens were laying down the foundations of techniques that chefs still brag about, so the next time you rip open a bag of beef jerky or spread smoked salmon on your toast, remember, you're eating like an Egyptian. Without refrigeration, they figured it out. Salt, sun, smoke, fat, resins. They hacked food storage in ways that kept people alive for centuries. And that's the beauty of it. Behind the pyramids, the temples, the colossal statues, there were kitchens. Kitchens where ordinary people worked out the science of survival with nothing more than the desert, the river, and a little creativity. So if you enjoyed this journey into ancient food hacks and want more strange, brilliant tricks from history, go ahead and like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Which one would you actually try? Salty jerky, fat-sealed goose, or eternal resin ribs?